He was the kind of boy people rarely noticed. In the busy halls of the school, where voices echoed and laughter bounced off the walls, he moved quietly, almost like a shadow. While others walked in groups, talking loudly and sharing stories, he stayed close to the edges, carrying his worn school bag and keeping his eyes low. It wasn't that he didn't want to be seen. It was just that no one ever really looked. At home, life was simple but not easy. His family lived in a small house at the end of a narrow street. The paint on the walls had faded long ago, and the roof made soft creaking sounds when the wind passed through at night. His father worked long hours doing whatever jobs he could find, and his mother managed the home with quiet strength. There wasn't much, but there was enough to get by. The boy understood this from a young age. He never asked for things he knew his parents couldn't afford. While other kids talked about new shoes or the latest gadgets, he stayed silent. His own shoes were slightly torn at the edges, and his uniform had been carefully stitched more than once. Still, he wore it neatly every day, as if trying to show respect for what little he had. School was not a place where he felt comfortable, but it was where he spent most of his time. He sat in the same seat every day, usually at the back of the class. Teachers didn't dislike him, but they didn't pay him much attention either. He wasn't the loud one who answered quickly, nor the troublemaker who caused distractions. He was just there. Sometimes, during lessons, he would drift into his own thoughts. Not because he didn't care, but because there was something else that filled his mind more deeply. Something that gave him a sense of calm that the outside world never did. Music. It wasn't something he talked about. In fact, no one at school even knew he had any interest in it. But inside him, music lived like a quiet secret. At home, there was no instrument. No piano, no guitar, not even a radio that worked properly. But he still found ways to listen. Sometimes he would pause near small shops where songs played softly in the background. Other times, he would hear melodies coming from a neighbor's house late in the evening. He didn't just hear the music, he felt it. He would memorize the sounds, the rhythm, the rise and fall of each note. And later, when he was alone, he would tap his fingers gently on the table or his knees, trying to recreate what he had heard. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for him. The only place where his hidden world came a little closer to reality was at school. In one quiet corner of the main hall, there stood an old piano. It had clearly seen better days. The wood was scratched, a few keys were slightly uneven, and it looked like it had been forgotten over time. Most students walked past it without a second glance. Some didn't even know it worked. But he knew. The first time he touched it had been by accident. One afternoon, after most students had gone home, he had stayed back longer than usual. He wasn't in a hurry. He rarely was. As he passed the hall, his eyes fell on the piano. Something about it pulled him closer. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. His heart beat faster, though he didn't fully understand why. Slowly, he stepped toward it. His fingers hovered above the keys for a moment. He hesitated. Then, very gently, he pressed one. The sound that came out was soft, slightly out of tune. But to him, it felt like magic. He pressed another key. Then another. Before he realized it, he was sitting down, trying different combinations, listening carefully, adjusting his fingers as if he already knew what he was doing. It wasn't perfect. Not even close. But something inside him clicked that day. From that moment on, the piano became his secret place. He began staying after school whenever he could. Sometimes he would pretend to organize his books slowly, just to wait until the hall was empty. Other times, he would finish his work quickly so he could slip away unnoticed. Sitting at that old piano, he felt different. The quiet boy who avoided attention suddenly had a voice, but not in words. Through the keys, he could express things he didn't even know how to explain. He didn't follow rules or formal lessons. He simply listened, remembered, and tried. When a note didn't sound right, he would pause, think, and try again. His fingers slowly became more confident. The random sounds began turning into soft melodies. Days turned into weeks. No one noticed him slipping in and out of the hall. No one asked why he stayed late. To everyone else, he was still just the quiet boy in the background. But something was changing. Even though he remained silent in class, there was a new kind of focus in his eyes, a quiet determination. He still avoided attention, but inside he carried something stronger than before. One afternoon, while he was playing, he didn't realize someone had entered the hall. He was too lost in the music. His fingers moved gently across the keys, creating a slow, emotional tune. It wasn't something he had learned. It came from somewhere deeper, from his thoughts, his feelings, his life. Behind him, a teacher stood still, watching. At first, the teacher didn't make a sound. Perhaps out of surprise or perhaps out of curiosity. The boy continued playing, unaware of the presence behind him. The music wasn't loud, but it filled the empty hall in a way that was hard to ignore. It carried a feeling of longing, mixed with quiet hope. It didn't sound like something a beginner would play. When the final note faded, the boy let his hands rest on the keys for a moment. Then he slowly looked up and froze. The teacher was standing just a few steps away. Fear rushed through him. He quickly stood up, stepping back from the piano as if he had done something wrong. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I won't touch it again." The teacher didn't respond immediately. Instead, the teacher walked a little closer, looking at him with a calm but thoughtful expression. "How long have you been playing?" the teacher asked. The boy hesitated. I don't know," he replied quietly. "I just try sometimes." There was a short silence. The teacher glanced at the piano, then back at him. "You taught yourself?" He nodded. For a moment, it seemed like the teacher was about to say something more. But instead, the teacher simply gave a small nod and said, "You should head home. It's getting late." The boy quickly picked up his bag and left, his heart still racing. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Had he done something wrong? Would he be told not to touch the piano again? Would others find out? The next day at school, everything felt the same, and yet different. He walked through the halls as usual, sat in his usual seat, and kept to himself. But in the back of his mind, there was a quiet worry. Then, during the afternoon, an announcement was made. The school would be holding a talent showcase. Students could sign up to perform anything: singing, dancing, acting, or playing an instrument. The classroom buzzed with excitement. Voices filled the air as students discussed what they might do. He stayed silent. Performing was something he had never even imagined. The thought of standing in front of everyone made his chest tighten. He wasn't like the others. He didn't seek attention. But as the noise continued around him, one thought quietly slipped into his mind. The piano. He quickly pushed the thought away. That wasn't for him. Couldn't be. Still, something about the idea lingered, refusing to disappear completely. For the first time, the quiet boy who had always stayed in the background found himself standing at the edge of a possibility he didn't yet understand. And deep inside, something was beginning to change. The announcement about the talent showcase did not leave his mind, even after the school day ended. While other students walked home in groups, laughing and talking about what they would perform, he walked alone as usual. But this time, his thoughts were not quiet. They kept circling back to the same question. What if? He didn't like that question. It made him uncomfortable, pulled him towards something unfamiliar. All his life, he had stayed away from attention. He knew how to remain unnoticed, how to blend in, how to avoid being judged. That was his safe place. And this was the complete opposite. At home, everything looked the same as always. His mother was busy in the small kitchen, preparing a simple meal. His father had not returned yet. The evening air felt calm, but inside him, there was a quiet storm. He sat down in his usual spot, staring at the table. His fingers moved slightly, tapping a soft rhythm without him realizing it. His mother noticed. "You seem distracted today," she said gently, placing a plate in front of him. He looked up quickly, as if pulled out of his thoughts. "No, just tired," he replied. She didn't push further. She simply nodded and continued with her work. She had learned that he spoke only when he felt ready. After dinner, he stepped outside for a while. The sky was dark, with only a few dim lights from nearby houses. Somewhere in the distance, faint music could be heard. He paused, listening carefully. It wasn't clear, but it was enough. His fingers moved again, this time more deliberately, as if he were playing on invisible keys. His mind filled with notes, patterns, small pieces of melody. And once again the thought returned. What if he played? He shook his head slightly, trying to push it away. It didn't make sense. He had never performed. He didn't even know how to read music properly. What if he made a mistake? What if people laughed? That last thought stayed longer than the others. He had heard laughter before. Not always directed at him, but enough to understand what it felt like to be on the weaker side of it. He didn't want to become the center of that. The next morning at school, the excitement had only grown. Students were forming small groups, practicing lines, trying out dance moves, or discussing song choices. Even the usually quiet corners of the school felt alive with energy. He watched from a distance. As he walked past the main hall, his eyes automatically turned toward the piano. It stood there, unchanged, quiet as always. For a moment he slowed down. Then he kept walking. In class, the teacher began talking about the showcase again, encouraging everyone to participate. "This is your chance to show something special," the teacher said. "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours." The words stayed with him. It just has to be yours. He lowered his eyes, thinking about it. If he played, it wouldn't be like others. He didn't have a rehearsed piece or something impressive to show off. He only had what he felt when he sat at the piano. Would that be enough? As the day went on, he tried to focus on his lessons, but it was difficult. His mind kept drifting. Later that afternoon, when most students had already left, he found himself once again near the hall. This time, he didn't hesitate for long. He walked in. The hall was quiet, just like before. Sunlight came in softly through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The piano waited in its usual place. He sat down slowly. For a few seconds, he didn't move. He just looked at the keys. Then gently he began to play. The sound was soft at first, almost unsure. But as his fingers continued, the music grew stronger. It carried a mix of emotions. Uncertainty, hope, fear, and something else he couldn't fully explain. He played longer than usual that day, as if he was trying to answer his own question through the music. When he finally stopped, he took a deep breath. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" The voice startled him. He turned quickly. It was the same teacher from before. He stood up immediately, nervous again. I didn't mean to." "It's all right," the teacher interrupted calmly. "You don't have to be afraid." He stayed quiet, unsure of what to say. The teacher stepped closer, not too close, just enough to be heard clearly. "The showcase," the teacher continued. "You've been thinking about joining." He hesitated, then nodded slightly. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I don't think I can." "Why not?" He looked down at his hands. "I've never played in front of anyone, and I don't know if I'm good enough." The teacher didn't respond immediately. Instead, the teacher pulled a chair nearby and sat down. "Do you know what most people are afraid of?" the teacher asked. He shook his head. "Being seen," the teacher said. "Not because they have nothing to show, but because they care too much about what others will think." He listened quietly. "I heard you play yesterday," the teacher continued. "And just now, you don't play like someone trying to impress. You play like someone who feels something." He didn't know how to respond to that. "No one expects perfection," the teacher added. "But honesty, that's rare." There was a long pause. "What if I fail?" he asked softly. The teacher gave a small smile. "Then you fail, and life goes on. But what if you don't try at all?" That question hit him harder than he expected. The teacher stood up. "The sign-up sheet will be outside the office until tomorrow," the teacher said. "You don't have to decide now, but don't let fear decide for you." With that, the teacher walked away, leaving him alone in the hall once again. He sat back down slowly. His hands rested on the keys, but he didn't play this time. He just sat there thinking. Fear was still there, strong as ever. But now something else stood beside it. A small, quiet courage. The next day felt heavier than usual. Every step he took toward school felt slower. The thought of the sign-up sheet stayed in his mind from the moment he woke up. When he arrived, he noticed a small crowd near the office. Students were writing their names, talking excitedly, some even cheering each other on. He stayed at a distance. He told himself he would just look. Nothing more. As he moved closer, he could see the paper clearly now. Names filled most of the lines. Some written boldly, others quickly, as if done without thinking. His heart began to beat faster. He stood there for a moment, then turned away. He walked a few steps, and stopped. The teacher's words came back to him. Don't let fear decide for you. He closed his eyes for a brief second. Then slowly he turned back. Each step toward the sheet felt heavy, but he kept going. The voices around him faded into the background. The only sound he could hear was his own heartbeat. He reached the table. The paper was right in front of him now. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the pen. For a moment he hesitated. Then carefully he wrote his name. Not boldly, not perfectly, but clearly enough. As soon as he finished, he placed the pen back and stepped away. No one reacted. No one noticed. And yet, for him, everything had changed. For the first time in his life, he had chosen to be seen. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel confident. He felt scared. But beneath that fear, there was something new. A quiet sense of movement. Like his life had taken a small but important step forward. And there was no turning back now. The moment he wrote his name on that sheet, something changed, but not in the way he had hoped. First, nothing happened. Students continued talking, laughing, and planning their performances. No one paid attention to him as he quietly stepped away from the table. For a brief moment he felt relief. Maybe it would stay that way. Maybe no one would notice his name at all. But that feeling didn't last long. By the time the next class ended, the list had already started spreading from one group to another. Students were curious. They wanted to know who was performing and what they would do. Some names got instant reactions. Cheers, excitement, even small crowds forming around those students. Then someone noticed his name. First, it was just a small reaction. Confused look. A second glance at the paper. Wait, is this the same person? Someone asked quietly. Another student leaned in, reading more carefully. Yeah, I think it is. Within minutes, whispers began to move through the hallway. He didn't hear it right away. He was in class, sitting in his usual place, trying to focus on his work. But something felt different. There were glances, quick looks that disappeared the moment he noticed them. Then came the first comment. You signed up? A voice said from behind him. He turned slightly. A few students were looking at him now. Ah, yes, he replied, unsure. What are you even going to do? Another voice asked, half curious, half amused. He hesitated. Play, he said quietly. Play what? Someone else added. He didn't have a clear answer. Just play. A short silence followed. Then came a soft laugh. Not loud, not cruel in an obvious way, but enough. All right, the first student said, shaking his head slightly. This should be interesting. The words didn't sound encouraging. He turned back to his desk, trying to ignore the growing attention. His hands felt colder now. His decision, which had felt brave just hours ago, now felt heavy. As the day went on, the whispers grew louder. Some students didn't say anything directly, but their reactions were clear. Raised eyebrows, smirks, curious stares. Others were more open. I didn't even know he could do anything, one student said loudly enough for others to hear. Maybe it's going to be a joke performance, another replied, laughing. Each word added a small weight to his chest. By lunchtime, the story had spread across different classes. He sat alone as usual, but this time the silence around him felt different. It wasn't peaceful. Felt like waiting, like something was building. A group of students nearby started talking about the showcase. I heard there's going to be singing, dancing, even a comedy act, one said. Yeah, and apparently he's playing the piano, another added, glancing in his direction. A few heads turned. He plays piano? Someone asked. surprised. "I've never seen him do anything," came the reply. "Same. This is going to be awkward." They didn't lower their voices. He kept his eyes on his food, though he had stopped eating. His appetite had disappeared. Part of him wanted to stand up and leave. Another part told him to stay still, to not draw more attention. But inside, doubt had started to grow. Maybe they were right. Maybe he shouldn't have signed up. After lunch, as he walked through the corridor, he overheard more conversations. "Are you going to watch his performance?" someone asked. "Of course," came the reply. "I don't want to miss it." "Same. This might be the funniest part of the show." He slowed down for a moment, then kept walking. The words followed him. By the time school ended, the excitement around the showcase had turned into something else, at least for him. It wasn't just an event anymore. Felt like a test. And he wasn't sure he was ready. That evening, he didn't go to the hall. For the first time in days, he avoided the piano. He went straight home, his steps slower than usual. At dinner, he barely spoke. His mother noticed again, but this time she didn't ask questions. She could sense something was weighing on him. After eating, he sat quietly, staring at the wall. The thoughts in his mind were louder than ever. What if they laugh? What if I mess up? What if I freeze and can't play at all? Each question made the next one worse. He tried to imagine himself on stage in front of everyone. The idea alone made his chest tighten. He had always avoided attention for a reason, and now he had walked straight into it. Later that night, he stepped outside again. The air felt cooler. The street was quiet. He sat on a small step near the door, resting his elbows on his knees. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, slowly, his fingers began to move again, tapping a rhythm. But this time, the rhythm felt broken, uneven, like his thoughts. He stopped. For the first time, music didn't come easily. It scared him. The next day at school, things didn't get better. If anything, they became more intense. Now people weren't just whispering, they were waiting to see what would happen. As he entered the classroom, he felt the eyes on him again. Not everyone, but enough. "Hey!" a voice called out from across the room. He looked up. A confident student leaned back in his chair, watching him with a slight smile. "So, you're performing?" he asked. He nodded slowly. "On the piano?" the student continued. "Yes." The student exchanged looks with his friends. Then he said something that made the entire room go quiet for a moment. "If he plays something good, I'll kneel." There was a short pause. Then laughter broke out. Not from everyone, but enough to fill the room. The words echoed in his mind. "I'll kneel." It wasn't said with respect. It was said with disbelief, like it could never happen. He stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. Then he quietly walked to his seat and sat down. No response. No reaction. But inside, something shifted. The doubt was still there. The fear was still there. But now there was something else mixed in. A quiet pressure. Not just to perform, but to prove something. Even though he didn't want attention, he didn't want to be seen as a joke either. The rest of the day passed slowly. Every class felt longer. Every minute stretched. When the final bell rang, most students rushed out as usual. He stayed behind. For a moment, he considered going straight home again. But then he thought about the piano. About the only place where he felt like himself. Without fully deciding, his feet carried him toward the hall. When he entered, the space was empty, quiet, just like before. The piano stood in its place, waiting. He walked toward it slowly and sat down. For a few seconds, he didn't move. Then he placed his hands on the keys. This time, when he played, it was different. The music wasn't soft and searching like before. It carried something heavier, something deeper. All the fear, the doubt, the words he had heard. They all found their way into the notes. He played longer than he ever had before. Not for practice, not to improve, but to understand himself. When he finally stopped, his hands were still. The hall was silent. But inside him, the noise had changed. The fear was still there. But it no longer felt like something that could stop him completely. It felt like something he had to face. And for the first time since signing his name, he realized something important. He couldn't go back. Not because others expected something from him, but because he had already taken the step forward. And now, whether he was ready or not, he had to keep going. The day of the showcase arrived faster than he expected. It felt like just yesterday he had written his name on that paper, his hand shaking, unsure of what he was doing. Now, there was no more time to think about it. No more time to wonder if it was the right decision. It was happening. From the moment he reached school, the atmosphere felt different. There was a kind of energy in the air. Louder than usual, more restless. Students were moving around quickly, some carrying costumes, others practicing lines or humming songs under their breath. Even the teachers seemed more alert, making sure everything was in place. He walked through the entrance quietly, just like any other day. But inside, nothing felt normal. His heart was beating faster than usual. His hands felt slightly cold. And his thoughts, they wouldn't slow down. What if I forget everything? What if my hands stop working? What if they laugh? He tried to take a deep breath, but it didn't help much. As he moved through the hallway, he could already hear people talking about the event. I can't wait for the dance performance, someone said. I heard there's going to be live singing too, another added. And the piano one, a voice said, followed by a small chuckle. That's the one I'm curious about. He kept walking. Each word felt like it followed him, sticking to his thoughts. When he reached his classroom, things didn't feel any easier. Students were more distracted than usual. Some were excited, others nervous, and a few were simply there to watch everything unfold. As he sat down, a few quick glances came his way. No one said anything directly this time, but they didn't need to. He already knew what they were thinking. The hours before the event felt long and heavy. Lessons passed, but no one was really paying attention. Even he found it impossible to focus. His mind kept jumping ahead, imagining the stage, the crowd, the moment he would have to sit at the piano. He had played many times before, but never like this. Never with people watching. Never with expectations hanging over him. Finally, the last class ended. The showcase was about to begin. Students were directed toward the main hall. Chairs had been arranged neatly, facing the stage. The old piano had been moved to the center, cleaned as much as possible, though its age still showed. He noticed it immediately. It looked different today. Not because it had changed, but because now everyone would see it. Just like they would see him. He stood near the side, unsure where to go. Performers were being called one by one to gather behind the stage. His name was somewhere in that list. Not first, not last, somewhere in the middle. That almost made it worse. It meant he had time to wait, time to think, time to feel every bit of nervousness building inside him. He moved behind the stage area, where a few other students were preparing. One was quietly practicing a song. Another was repeating lines under their breath. Some looked confident. Others looked just as nervous as he felt. But unlike them, he didn't have something clear to hold on to. No script. No rehearsed routine. Just his feelings. And the piano. The event began. From behind the curtain, he could hear everything. The host's voice. The applause. The first performance. A group dance. Loud music. Energetic moves. Cheers from the audience. It was followed by a singing performance. Then another act. Each time the applause came, it sounded louder than before. Each time someone walked back from the stage, they carried a mix of relief and pride. He watched quietly. Time moved slowly. With every performance, his turn came closer. His breathing became heavier. He tried to calm himself, pressing his hands together, then releasing them. At one point, he looked down at his fingers. They didn't feel like his own. They felt stiff, uncertain. What if they don't move the way they should? The thought made his chest tighten. Then, a voice broke through his thoughts. You're next. For a moment, everything went silent. Not around him, but inside him. He looked up. The teacher stood nearby, giving him a calm nod. It's your turn, the teacher repeated gently. He swallowed hard. His feet felt heavy as he stood up. Each step toward the stage felt slower than the last. He could hear his heartbeat clearly now. Loud, steady, unavoidable. As he reached the side of the curtain, he paused for a brief second. The teacher stepped closer and spoke softly. "Just play," the teacher said. "Don't think about anything else." He nodded, though he wasn't sure if he fully understood how to do that. Then his name was called. The sound of it echoed through the hall. For a moment there was a shift in the audience. A small ripple of curiosity. Some whispers. Some quiet laughs. He stepped onto the stage. The lights felt brighter than he expected. For a second he couldn't see clearly. Then slowly the room came into view. Rows of students. Teachers. Faces watching. Waiting. Some curious. Some doubtful. Some already expecting something to go wrong. He felt all of it at once. But he kept walking. Step by step. Until he reached the piano. The same piano he had sat at so many times before. But now it felt different. Not unfamiliar. Just heavier. He sat down slowly. The chair made a small sound as he adjusted. The microphone nearby picked up even the smallest movement. The room grew quieter. The whispers faded. A strange kind of silence settled in. He placed his hands on his lap. Then slowly he lifted them and rested them on the keys. For a moment he didn't play. His fingers hovered there. Still, the silence stretched. Somewhere in the audience, a faint cough could be heard. A chair shifted. Time felt like it was standing still. His mind raced. What if I can't do this? What if everything goes wrong? His hands trembled slightly. Then he closed his eyes. Just for a second. And in that moment he remembered something simple. The quiet hall. The empty space. The way the piano sounded when no one was watching. The way he felt when he played not for others but for himself. He took a slow breath. And then, he pressed the first key. A soft note filled the room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it was clear. He pressed another. Then another. The melody began slowly, almost like it was finding its way. His fingers were still slightly tense. But they moved. Carefully. Gently. The audience remained silent. Some leaned forward slightly. Others simply watched. He continued. Note by note. His breathing began to steady. The sound grew a little stronger. A little more confident. The trembling in his hands didn't disappear. But it no longer controlled him. The music started to take shape. It wasn't something practiced over and over. It wasn't something copied. It was something real. Something that came from inside him. And as the melody grew, something began to change. Not just in him, but in the room. First, no one moved. The sound of the piano spread slowly across the hall, soft but clear. It didn't rush. It didn't try to impress. It simply existed, filling the silence in a way that made people stop and listen. A few students who had been whispering leaned back in their chairs. Not because someone told them to, but because something about the music made them pause. On stage, he was still nervous. That feeling hadn't disappeared. But something had shifted. The moment his fingers found a rhythm, his focus changed. He was no longer thinking about the crowd the same way. The faces in front of him became less important. The fear didn't vanish, but it moved to the background. The music came forward. His hands began to move more freely now. The notes connected better, flowing into each other with more confidence. It was still gentle, still emotional, but now it carried a quiet strength. In the audience, expressions began to change. At first, there had been doubt, curiosity mixed with low expectations. Now there was something else. Tension. A teacher sitting near the front slowly straightened in their seat. Another folded their hands, watching closely. Even the students who had expected something awkward were now silent. The melody deepened. It was no longer just a series of notes. Felt like a story. One that didn't need words. There was a softness in it, like quiet evenings and long thoughts. Then came a slight rise, as if something inside was trying to push forward. A feeling of struggle, of wanting to be heard. His fingers pressed the keys with more purpose now. Not perfectly, but honestly, and that honesty began to reach people. A student in the second row who had earlier laughed, now sat still, eyes fixed on the stage. The smile had faded. In its place was a look of surprise. Another student, sitting near the back, leaned forward slightly, as if trying to understand what they were hearing. Even the confident one, the one who had made that bold statement, was no longer relaxed. His arms, once folded casually, had dropped to his sides. His expression had changed, though he didn't say a word. On stage, he didn't notice all of this clearly, but he could feel it. The room had changed. The energy was different, and that gave him something he didn't expect. A sense of space. The fear that had once filled his chest began to loosen. His breathing became more natural. His shoulders relaxed slightly. For the first time since he stepped onto the stage, he felt closer to how he felt when he played alone. The music responded to that. It grew. Not louder in a dramatic way, but fuller, richer. His left hand carried a steady bass, while his right hand moved with more freedom, creating a melody that felt alive. It rose and fell, like a quiet conversation between thoughts and emotions. The hall remained silent. No whispers, no movement, just listening. Time seemed to slow down. Each note held its place a little longer. Each pause felt meaningful. He wasn't trying to impress anymore. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply playing. And somehow that made all the difference. The melody shifted again. This time it carried something heavier, a deeper emotion. It was harder to describe, but easy to feel. It sounded like everything he had kept inside for so long. The silence, the loneliness, the quiet hope, the fear of being seen, and the desire to be understood. It all came out through his fingers, and the audience felt it. A teacher near the front blinked slowly, as if caught in a thought. Another person quietly placed their hand on their lap, sitting completely still. Even those who didn't understand music could understand this, because it wasn't just music. It was real. On stage, his eyes remained focused on the keys. He didn't look up. He didn't want to. He didn't need to. For the first time, he felt like he belonged exactly where he was. The boy who once avoided attention was now holding an entire room in silence. Not by force, but by feeling. The melody began to rise again. This time, it carried a sense of strength. Not loud or proud, but steady, like someone slowly finding their place. His fingers moved faster now, but not out of control. There was a flow, a natural rhythm guiding him forward. The notes came together in a way that felt complete. The fear that had once controlled his hands was no longer there. In its place was something else. Confidence. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that demands attention. But the quiet kind, the kind that grows slowly, built from moments no one else sees. And now everyone could hear it. In the audience, no one shifted. No one spoke. Even breathing felt quieter. The room was completely still, as if no one wanted to break the moment. Then, slowly, the music began to soften. The strong notes gave way to gentle ones. The pace slowed. The melody returned to something calm, something peaceful, like a deep breath after a long journey. His fingers moved more lightly now, each note placed with care. Felt like the ending of something meaningful. Not rushed, not forced, just right. The final notes approached. He didn't think about them. He let them come naturally. One by one, they faded into the silence. And then, it stopped. His hands rested on the keys for a brief moment. Then slowly he lifted them. The hall was completely silent. Not a single sound. For a second it felt like time had paused. No one moved. No one reacted. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, but not in a bad way. In a powerful way. As if everyone needed a moment to process what they had just experienced. He sat there unsure. Was it over? Did something go wrong? He didn't know. His heart began to beat faster again. The fear tried to return. But before it could fully take over, a sound broke through the silence. A single clap, then another, and within seconds, the entire hall filled with applause. Loud, strong, real. It wasn't polite clapping. It wasn't forced. It was genuine. Students stood up. Teachers joined in. The sound grew louder and louder, echoing across the hall. He looked up for the first time. What he saw didn't feel real. People were on their feet, applauding, some with wide eyes, some smiling, some still looking surprised. The same room that had doubted him was now responding in a completely different way. He didn't know how to react. He just sat there for a moment, taking it in. The noise, the reaction, the change. And then slowly he stood up. Not confidently, not dramatically, just quietly. But this time, he was no longer invisible. For a few moments, the applause did not stop. It continued, strong and steady, filling every corner of the hall. The sound felt almost unreal to him. Just a short while ago, this same room had been full of doubt, quiet laughter, and low expectations. Now it was something completely different. He stood near the piano, unsure of what to do next. His hands were still slightly trembling, not from fear this time, but from everything he had just experienced. His chest rose and fell as he tried to take it all in. People were standing, clapping, looking at him, not with judgment, but with respect. It was a feeling he had never known before. He gave a small, unsure nod, then slowly stepped away from the piano. Each step felt lighter than before, as if something heavy had been lifted from him. As he walked off the stage, the applause continued for a few more seconds before slowly fading. Behind the stage, the noise softened. The bright lights were no longer on him. The space felt calmer, quieter. But inside him, everything had changed. He leaned slightly against the wall, taking a deep breath. His mind was still catching up to what had just happened. "You did well." He looked up. The teacher stood nearby again, with the same calm expression. But this time, there was something more in it. A quiet pride. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. "Thank you," he said softly. The teacher gave a small nod in return. "That was honest," the teacher said. And people felt it. He looked down at his hands again. For so long, these hands had only played in empty rooms, in quiet moments no one else saw. Now they had done something more, something that reached others. Before he could think further, he heard movement nearby. A few students were coming off the stage after the next performance, talking excitedly. Some of them glanced at him as they passed. But this time their expressions were different. No smirks, no quiet jokes, just looks of surprise, and something close to admiration. One of them slowed down for a second. "That was really good," the student said, a bit unsure, as if not used to saying something like that to him. He nodded again, still not fully comfortable with attention. "Thanks," he replied quietly. The student gave a small smile and walked on. More people passed by. A few nodded. Some said nothing but looked at him in a way that felt new. He wasn't invisible anymore, but it didn't feel overwhelming. Felt calm. Then, a familiar voice came from behind. "Hey!" He turned. It was the confident student, the one who had laughed, the one who had said those words in front of everyone. "If he plays something good, I'll kneel." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise from the stage filled the background, but around them, it felt quiet. The confident student took a step closer. His expression was no longer relaxed or amused. It was serious. "I didn't think," he started, then paused. He looked down briefly, then back up. "I didn't think you could do that." There was no mockery in his voice now, only honesty. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. The confident student took another step forward. And then, without saying anything else, he slowly lowered himself. Right there, in front of him, he knelt, not as a joke, not for attention, but because he had said he would. The movement was simple, but it carried weight. A few nearby students noticed. The small conversation around them quieted. For a second, it felt like time slowed again, just like on the stage. He stood still, unsure how to react. He had not expected this. He had not wanted this. But here it was. Real. The confident student stayed there for a moment, then looked up. "I meant what I said," he said quietly. "And you proved me wrong." There was no laughter, no sarcasm, just respect. After a second, he stood up again. He didn't wait for a response. He simply gave a small nod and walked away. The moment passed, but it stayed with him. Not because someone had knelt, but because something had changed. Not just in others, but in him. For the first time, he realized that being seen wasn't always something to fear. Could also be something to accept. The rest of the event continued. More performances took place. More applause filled the hall. But for him, everything felt different now. He watched from the side, calmer than before. The fear that once filled him was no longer in control. It was still there, somewhere in the background, but it didn't decide his actions anymore. When the event finally ended, students began to leave in groups, talking excitedly about their favorite moments. His performance was one of them. He heard it in passing conversations. That piano piece, I didn't expect that. Same. It was actually really good. I didn't even know he could play like that. He walked through the hallway, hearing these words without stopping. He didn't feel the need to respond. Just hearing them was enough. Outside, the evening air felt calm again. Familiar. He started walking home just like he always did. But this time his steps felt different. Not faster, not slower, just lighter. When he reached home, the door was slightly open. He stepped inside. His mother looked up from her work. "You're late today," she said gently. He nodded. "There was a school event," he replied. She smiled softly. "How was it?" He paused for a moment. Then, in the simplest way, he said, "I played." She looked at him more closely now. "And?" He hesitated, not sure how to explain everything. "It went well," he said. "That was all. But it was enough." She smiled, a little more warmly this time. "I'm glad," she said. Later that night, he stepped outside again. The same quiet street, the same dim lights, but something inside him had changed. He sat down just like before. For a moment, he did nothing. Then slowly, his fingers began to move again, tapping a rhythm on his knee. This time, the rhythm felt steady, complete, not broken, not unsure. He looked up at the sky, taking a slow breath. For so long, he had hidden what he loved. Not because he didn't believe in it, but because he was afraid of how others would see it. Now he understood something simple. Being seen didn't take something away from him. It gave something back. Confidence. Not loud, not overwhelming, but real. And as he sat there in the quiet night, one thought stayed with him. This was not the end of something. It was the beginning. A quiet beginning, but a strong one. And this time, he wasn't afraid of it.